In the last few lectures, we have covered Philip's early campaigns. Philip was able to rebuild the Macedonian army and push the Illyrians out of Upper Macedonia. Next, Philip came into conflict with Athens and succeeded in capturing all of Athens' possessions on the Thermaic Gulf. Now what Philip needed was an all-out war to legitimize Macedon as a major power in Greece, and that came in the form of the Third Sacred War. Initially, Macedon was not involved with the war. The conflict began as a local dispute between Phocis and Thebes. Phocis had a rather interesting history in ancient Greece. It was neither rich in natural resources nor well suited for large commercial enterprises. Phocis was mainly pastoral. As a result, no large cities sprang up within its territory. But there was one very culturally significant place situated in Phocis, Delphi. It was during the Corinthian War that Phocis appealed to Sparta for assistance against Thebes. That was bad enough, but the relationship hit rock bottom when Phocis refused to help Thebes at the Battle of Mantinea in 362 BC. From that point on, Thebes and Phocis had a lasting hatred towards each other. That tension led to Thebes' accusation that Phocis was cultivating sacred land. This brought the case under the jurisdiction of the Amphictyonic League. The League was a religious organization that governed the most sacred site in ancient Greece, the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. At the moment, Thebes dominated the League, and naturally induced the governing body to fine the Phocians. But really what this was about was Thebes' desire to punish one of her longtime enemies, Phocis. Thebes even managed to have the League condemn Sparta, another one of her main rivals. Diodorus writes the League, quote, brought charges against the Phocians and demanded that if the Phocians did not pay money to the god, they should lay under a curse the land of those who were cheating the god, end quote. The Thebans were undoubtedly aware that neither Phocis nor Sparta had any real intention of paying such a large sum of money, but that wasn't the point. The main goal was to discredit Phocis in the eyes of the Greeks, and perhaps even use the incident as a pretext to launch an invasion of Phocis. As a result of the Theban hostilities, the Phocian Federation held a meeting and appointed Philomelos as their leading general. Anamarchos was elected as his deputy. Both commanders held strong anti-Theban sentiments. Philomelos was also keen on asserting the Phocian claim to the presidency of the Amphictyonic League. If successful, the Phocians could simply remove the fine. After the conference, Philomelos traveled to Sparta to meet with the Spartan king Archidamus. The Spartans provided Philomelos with 15 talents to raise troops. Diodorus describes the meeting. Quote, Philomelos accordingly disclosed to Archidamus that he had decided to seize Delphi, and that if he succeeded in obtaining the guardianship of the shrine, he would annul the decrees of the Amphictyonic League. Although Archidamus approved of the proposal, he said he would not for the present give assistance openly, but that he would cooperate secretly in every respect, providing both money and mercenaries, end quote. Fresh with funds, Philomelos began assembling a mercenary army using the 15 talents that Sparta had provided. Philomelos then did the unthinkable and marched on sacred Delphi. After capturing the temple, he seized the property of one of the most important families in Delphi. News of Philomelos' move against the sacred site quickly reached the Locrians. The Locrians supported Thebes and decided to mount a relief effort. Philomelos' army met the Locrians in open battle near Delphi. The Phocians hammered the Locrians and tossed many prisoners off of the cliffs situated near the sanctuary. After the victory, Philomelos returned to Delphi and began to fortify the city. Next, he had the oracle proclaim his actions as legitimate. He then sent embassies to all of the Greek city-states in an effort to seek further justification for his actions. Diodorus describes Philomelos' activities in further detail. Quote, and Philomelos, being elated by his victory, hacked from the slabs the pronouncements of the Amphictyonic League, deleted the letters recording their judgments, and personally caused a report to be circulated that he had resolved not to plunder the oracle, nor had he purposed to commit any other lawless deed, end quote. Nonetheless, the Thebans responded by declaring a sacred war against Phocis in 355. Eventually, nearly every city-state in Greece was dragged into the war. The Thebans had the backing of a majority of the Amphictyonic League, while the Phocians were backed by Sparta and Athens. With war now officially declared, Philomelos decided he needed to further increase the size of his army. This, of course, meant more funds would be needed. Previously, Philomelus had resisted the temptation to raid the treasury of Apollo. Taking the gifts of the gods was considered to be one of the greatest acts of sacrilege. Nonetheless, the prospect of facing Thebes and her allies caused Philomelus to change his mind, and thousands of talents were seized at Delphi. The additional funds allowed him to quickly assemble a formidable army of 10,000 troops. Diodorus writes, quote, "Since the war required ampler funds, he was compelled to lay his hands on the sacred dedications and to plunder the oracle. By setting the base pay for the mercenaries at half as much again as was usual, he quickly assembled a large number of mercenaries, since many answered the summons to the campaign on account of the size of the pay. Now no men of honorable character enrolled for the campaign because of their reverence for the gods, but the worst knaves and those who despise the gods because of their own greed, eagerly gathered around Philomelus, and quickly a strong army was formed out of those whose object it was to plunder the shrine. So Philomelus, because of the magnitude of his resources, soon had prepared a considerable army." End quote. Still, Philomelus faced some dangers. First, there was the immediate threat of a Theban and Locrian invasion force. There was also the possibility of the Thessalians arriving from the north to reinforce the Amphictyonic alliance. A combined army of that type would have been nearly impossible for the Phocians to defeat. Therefore, it was imperative that the Phocians quickly pick off their enemies one by one, especially before they had time to organize. To prevent this link-up from happening, Philomelus first marched his army into Locris. The Locrians sent a force of cavalry to halt the Phocians, but they were quickly routed. Quote, "But Philomelus joining the battle with the Locrians, he lost 20 of his men, and not being able to get possession of their bodies, he asked through a herald the privilege of taking them up. The Locrians, refusing to grant this, gave the answer that amongst the Greeks it was the general law that temple robbers should be cast forth without burial. Philomelus so resented this that he joined the battle with the Locrians, and, bending every effort, slayed many of the enemy, and having got possession of their bodies, compelled the Locrians to make an exchange of the dead. As he was master of the open country, he sacked a large portion of Locri, having given his soldiers their fill of the spoils of war." End quote. The victory was quickly offset by the news that the Thessalians made it through the pass at Thermopylae, and were closing in on his position. Philomelus immediately attacked the Thessalians, and defeated them quite soundly. By now the Boeotians led by Thebes had assembled a large army of 13,000, and soon arrived in Locrian territory to confront Philomelus. In the face of such a large force, Philomelus decided to back away from the enemy and retreated back to Phocis. This allowed the Thebans to link up with the remnants of the Locrian and Thessalian forces. The Theban alliance then entered into Phocis, forcing Philomelus to confront them. Little about the battle is known, except that the Theban alliance defeated the Phocians, and then pursued the survivors up the slopes of Mount Parnassus. Philomelus himself was gravely injured, and rather than risk capture, threw himself off the mountain, falling to his death. Anomarchos, who was second in command, managed to salvage the remainder of the army, and quickly retreated back to Delphi, while the Theban alliance retired back to Boeotia. The Thebans assumed that after the defeat, Phocis would sue for peace. That would turn out to be a dangerous assumption, and we will get to that in the next video.